Good evening to all those present here in Maceió and also those who accompany us through the transmission. My name is Friar Luciano. I am the General Manager of Fraternity, International Humanitarian Federation. We are in a cycle of lectures in Brazil in some states. Some hundreds of people are accompanying us here today. Well, the theme of today is relationships with inner life, a reencounter with yourself. We are experiencing a moment in the world and in humanity in which we are being very much influenced and practically bombarded with a lot of information, and a sort of information that continuously attracts our consciousness to outside of ourselves, to everything that is outside of us. So the intention of this lecture is to bring elements and reflections for us to be able to see and identify how much we give attention, how much attention we give to all of this, if this movement of the planet brings peace to us, or if we feel a deep need of inner connection. So I leave a question here. We have been given attention to our inner world? How does each one see their inner world? This is to say, that which happens within us beyond, despite the appearances, is it something that we give attention to, or it happens unconsciously or subconsciously? And to be conscious of that which exists, because our inner world exists. Everything is inside of our consciousness. It exists, it's intrinsic to our deep nature, but we are much influenced to our personality, to this aspect of ours that interacts with the world. And with this, we disconnect ourselves, and at a certain point, we have the impression that we are too much turned outside, to the outside, and we feel disconnected in some way. Well, to know what happens to us, regardless of our mental, emotional, and external variation, it would be important for us to turn inwards and make some movement, some reflexive movement, meditation movement, how each one can understand, but we turn to our more internal nature. Because if we don't do this movement to the inside, all this stimulus that comes from outside with much dissociative, disconnect, superficial information generally ends up absorbing our attention, our consciousness, and at a certain point we feel like something is missing. But what is that is missing? Have we ever wondered why is that everything that comes from outside fills us from a certain standpoint, but brings some anxiety, a sensation that we don't have a goal? Where does all of it come from? So if we speak of a reencounter with ourselves, it is because we know in some way that we are disconnected in some degree, and we need to reencounter, refine something within to give a little bit more meaning to our lives, what we are doing here, what is our collaboration with the world, what is our collaboration for a civilization that lives such a paradoxical and conflictive moment. Well, to collaborate with this reflection, it's very important for us to try to draw for ourselves an understanding of how we see ourselves. Are we only this physical being, this physical appearance that sees each other mutually, or do we see within us a more subtle environment that we call emotional body? Our relationship with feelings, emotions, and beyond that, a little bit more subtle, our thoughts, this environment where our analytical, mental life happens, and more deeply our intuitive life. But where is all of this? How can we get this? We have an emotion at this moment or a thought. Where is this? Is it inside or outside of us? And we could ask ourselves, but what is the use of these questions? It's useful if we want to be a little bit more of freedom in our own search, in our identity, and also if we want to seek more deeply our values and carry to the world something that is more constructive, and not only be a relatively automatic being that interacts with all this information but doesn't deepen into them. And we only nourish a pattern of behavior, of reaction, a pattern of feeling and thought that eventually is not related to that which we believe or that which we aspire to manifest in this world. So, as we were saying, it is important to have this movement of turning inside of ourselves so that we can come to know ourselves a little bit better, and in this self-knowledge we will have many surprises. We will realize that many things that come to us that we end up believing that they are ours, they are not in fact. They are only movements of that which is collective and are not consistent with our aspirations. At some point, have we ever felt disconnected from something? It doesn't matter what it is this something for each one, but at this connection we see ourselves confused by that which is collective, influenced by everything that happens around. We don't feel ourselves strengthened to the point of keeping some distance to that which the collective manifests. That which is collective manifests. So we have to ask ourselves, what is this that dwells within us? Generally, most of us understands our consciousness as if it were our mind. We think that our consciousness is only our mental plane, our analytical thought, and our intellect. So we think, where does an intuition come from? An intuition or a subjective impression? Which place of the consciousness does it come from? The world does not help very much in this understanding because our understanding is based in the physical, emotional, mental consciousness, but only a material being. And everything that is our profound nature is not explored. It exists, it happens in our depths, but generally we don't even give attention to it. We don't try to come to know it profoundly, and we end up being superficially in this interaction that ends up bringing even many illnesses, because we know that what happens outside of us is relative. It doesn't nourish us internally. We don't have a practice, a search, a goal that turns ourselves inside, beyond appearances, and at a certain point we feel much confused. Now, if we don't give attention to this, day by day, moment after moment, trying to go a little bit beyond appearances, we are easy prey, let us say in some way, of everything that happens in the world, in the collective, that which is collective, and we end up weakening or losing those values that happen within us. So if we want to reestablish or establish evolutive relationships, constructive relationships with the world and with others outside of us, we have to begin by ourselves. Otherwise, we ask ourselves, why does a value that I want or need to share with others or develop with others come from? Where does it come from? Does it come from my basic education, my inner life? Where does it come from? Because if I don't nourish this value within myself, what I'm going to express externally will unavoidably, inevitably be a reflection of this whole collective superficial life that makes me believe that I'm only this, a common human being that needs to consume objects, situations, ideas, feelings. And at a certain point, we feel eventually frustrated because our depths remains there, atrophiated, let us say, in some way, because we don't give attention to all of this. So if we don't if we want to have if we want to have constructive relationships with others, we should look for this inner strength, discernment, to be more selective. Otherwise, we will be in this collective current that is very much superficial. Well, if we don't have this basis of values built within us, and a basis that is built through that mechanism that is very particular to each one, that we could call meditation, silence, prayer, something that makes our consciousness a little bit more receptive to our deep levels. Otherwise, we are carried by a current of superficialities that only make our values decay and make us believe that this collective consciousness has something to do with us, and we are almost obliged to manifest a pattern. The world, the media leads us to consume something, even ideas, feelings, reactions. But do we ask ourselves, is this related to me? Is this related to us? Is this part of our search in general? Or do we have to build an inner basis to be a more evolutive and constructive element before the world? For example, do we aspire to be sober beings with discernment, or are we satisfied to adhere to this collective pattern of the majority, patterns of behavior, feelings, thoughts? We enter this collective movement and we don't even confront this against that which we believe that is correct for us. So if we want to develop all of this, we have to observe the quality of our thoughts, the quality of our feelings, and with this we combine the necessary tension with the external world, with the tension that happens within us. Otherwise, there is a risk at a certain point for us to lose our profound identity, the values that we believe. This is diluted into this information that comes from outside, and at a certain point we cannot be conscious of all of this that happens within us, that we see and we live or experience a sort of a breakage. We feel that we break something inside of us. We are being carried by a stream that we don't know where it's going to end up, and that deeply creates many unquietness, a feeling of frustration, because we are not nourishing within us this inner search. So what is this inner life? What is it for each one of us? Because without this, if we don't look for this situation in our depths, we end up being impulsive beings. We live off impulses. We need impulses to feel alive before that which happens outside of us, and at a certain point we no longer know what we are, where we are going, which are our values, what we are developing. And is it this the reason why we are here? So, for example, let us look at our inner stability, how before something that was not foreseen or an unexpected situation, how do we react? How do we react before this? How do we interact before this? And how do we let ourselves be led by everything that happens outside of us without this transgressing that which we are trying to develop? So if we don't have this that we call inner life, generally what happens outside of us is very strong and very impactful. And when something that is unexpectable, that is not foreseen, we see inoffensive, disaligned, we see ourselves inoffensive, disaligned with a certain inner insecurity, isn't it? So all of this makes sense in the process of inner search and that which we call discernment and inner peace. Because you see, today and more each time, what happens in the world is an extremely chaotic situation that we don't know where it's going to end up, in the world of thoughts, feelings, external actions. Everything is extremely chaotic and without a direction. And in this lack of order, in this chaos, eventually we see ourselves before many situations that are impactful, and we see susceptible of not knowing how to conduct ourselves, how to control ourselves before these situations, how to keep our values before these situations. So if we don't have this habit, this costume, this decision of giving attention to our inner worlds, what happens outside drags our consciousnesses, and at a certain point we get lost or we feel much disconnected without realizing precisely what's happening inside of us. And we could ask ourselves, do we have convictions? Do we have any level within us that makes us secure? Do we feel security within us? And when something unexpected happens, it could be also a loss or a trauma. How do we interact with this? How do we turn to deal with the situation? Do we turn to our inner lives? Or do we only support ourselves externally and we feel fragile? So all these reflections are to promote a movement within our consciousness and to stimulate that eventually we can find within us something that can even give some sense, a little bit more of sense to our lives. But if we think it's fine, if the world is in accordance to our aspiration, it could be that this reflection has a little influence or benefit for us. Relationships with external life. How does each one of us relates with our own inner worlds? How do we deal with our own feelings? Do we work with this in an evolutive way or when a feeling that comes from outside or inside comes, we let ourselves be dragged by all of this impulsively? Or do we look for a relationship, we try to we find something within us, there is a parameter of self-control even, or we are simply dragged by that which is collective and we enter this movement of history or violence or dissociation. How is it for each one? Do we feel a need of reconnection or not? Well, see, this that we call inner life already exists within us. We don't have to pay for this. We don't have to look for it outside of us. We have to live a movement of reconciliation. Now, how to identify this dissociation within us? Again, if we have an inner world, if we have something more profound within us, we have to reconnect or live a reapproximation with this Because if we are very much turned to the outside, at a certain point, life drags us to external life, and we no longer know what we are, what our aspirations are, what our goals are. And do we want this? Are we looking for this? Is this what makes sense for us? Or in some way do we need to reconcile with something profound? It doesn't matter how each one of us identifies this something or looks for this something. The important thing is to do the movement of looking for it and this movement of inner search, inner life. Everything that happens in the physical world concretely goes through first our inner life in some way, either through our minds or emotional bodies or something more profound that is within us. For example, for this lecture to happen today here, this was conceived, organized, the condition was created. So it happened internally, mentally, and then at a certain point it happens physically. So what is the use of this reflection in the context of each one of our lives? If we are attentive to our inner worlds, we could be helped oftentimes to anticipate a situation that is approaching us, to be helped by our minds, our intuition, to foresee, to anticipate something and then collaborate more constructively with all of this, of not being taken so much by surprise and be taken from one side to another. Oftentimes something that is less harmonious begins to happen within our minds, so dissociative thought comes to our mind or a less positive feeling. This finds a similar environment inside of us, and at a certain point I have a reaction outside, either negative, aggressive reaction against someone or even a verbal aggression, and I am taken by that. I repent. I realize that I could have interrupted that manifestation. So what is the use of inner life in this context? When we are attentive to this, to our inner worlds, what happens in our consciousnesses, we see the approaching of something less constructive or a negative thought, and we can interrupt the flow of that. We don't allow this to trigger a reaction within us that would generate a negative external manifestation. This is very useful because oftentimes many of us does that many times a day, having reactions, feelings, thoughts. We treat others, we interact with life in a way that is dissonant with our best values. And at a certain point we ask ourselves, why didn't I interrupt this? Why did I allow myself to trigger this thought and feeling without interrupting this that was being built within me? So, for example, we have a situation in a relationship, in family, or work, whatever, and we materialize some type of incomprehension for others. We become intolerant for the way how others think or feel, and we forget that others have the freedom to be like they are. They have a way to think. Why does it have to be the same as mine? They have a way of feeling. Why does it have to be just like mine? So this process of disharmony inside of me, especially in the mind and the emotional body, at a certain point I manifest that which in my interpretation goes against my... I end up being aggressive or hostile against someone when I didn't need to be like that. I could see this movement inside of myself, If I am attentive to that which is happening inside, I can interrupt this thought, redirect it, educate it, mold my feeling with other values, and in this way I gradually become a more constructive human being and not so impulsive, so emotive, that gets so easily irritated, that generates a manifestation of disharmony. So if we are attentive to that which happens within us, we can interrupt many situations that eventually could not be manifested negatively, and more than that, prevent ourselves to have a disharmonious life. So we can interrupt the triggering of this harmonious manifestation. So we have time to manifest something that we believe that is more harmonious. So, but if we are not attentive to this, unavoidably many things that happen to us that come from the collective that are not our things. Our minds interact with that which is collective, and at a certain point we treat someone in an indelicate way or even aggressive way, and we ask ourselves, where does it come from? Why did I act like this with someone else in a way that even come through my mind? See, we have a conscious world that generally is our analytical mind, but we also have a subconscious level and an unconscious level. So everything that happens in that which is collective has an impact with us. If it doesn't have an impact with ideas, thoughts, and feelings, it has an impact on us with codes. So for example, today in the morning, eventually, for example, we observed that we were in a place where we were going through, there was an accident. It was a surprising, unexpected situation. It has an impact on us in some degree. But we continue. Apparently, we were not involved with that, and it didn't cause anything. However, the code of that situation impacts our subconscious. So that code of disharmony remains in our subconscious. Eventually a discussion, the suffering of someone, eventually a dissociation, and that code then remains in our unconscious, and it stays there, apparently inoffensive or inoperative. However, if another situation happens that triggers a stimulus that is similar to that code, we have a reaction from that which was in our subconscious. I don't know if I'm clear. So that code, so another situation happens similar to that one. It doesn't need to be an accident, a conflict, or a sound. We listen to a movie, or we are on the bus, or we are going through a place that has a public TV, and the same sound of the accident activates in us the code of the subconscious, and it manifests itself, and we eventually have some reaction. So if we are not careful with our inner lives, we don't have a margin to deal and to see if it comes from the subconscious or that which is collective, and if we can reconduct that reaction and contain that and say, oh, this is not part of my consciousness. This that wants to express itself through me does not belong to me. And I believe that most of us realizes that we live like this. We enter, we react, we express things of the subconscious or even the unconscious, and at a certain point we begin to suffer because we don't manage to contain these reactions, these impulses, and we lose the possibility to express that which is the best in us.
Algo muito importante temos que pensar é o seguinte.
Well, something very important that we have to think about is each one of us has their convictions, regardless of the scope. So we have convictions, we fall into something, our way of being, of living, being, values. We believe in some way that our values correspond in some degree with the sort of life that we want to manifest, either or the sort of human beings that we want to be. So if we don't strengthen these convictions through a more conscious movement of our inner lives, at some moment life is going to show us that that which we were thinking that was firm and strong in us through that which is unexpected or trauma or an non-forcing situation shows us that we were not so strong as we thought. So the trauma of a loss, for example, comes and it's so impactful that inner strength that we thought that we had through a situation that is a loss, for example, destroys our structure, and we see ourselves completely unprotected and defenseless, and without a possibility of relating with this in a mature way and relatively consistent. So, if we want to feel this inner strength, the strength to even deal with that which is unforeseen, that which comes from outside, this whole collective, dissociative influence. If we are not used to consolidate our values, what happens is that through any superficial situation, we see ourselves lost, dissociated, and without managing to manifest this that we were saying to ourselves, which is our inner strength. We have to think about this, because the world of today has a very confusing, chaotic movement, very superficial, that almost imposes behaviors, ways of thinking. And do we want this for our lives, this sort of pressure? Are we going to accept this like that, as if we didn't have anything inside of us? Or are we looking for a higher value, a higher inner life to be able to construct and collaborate with that which is outside of us? And observe yourselves, try to remember any moment when we see ourselves before obstacles, or that which we call obstacles, because oftentimes that which we call obstacles, tests, and difficulties are only opportunities for us to manifest that which we believe we are, or that which we believe that we dominate, and that comes to test us. Let's see if we have an emotional control, emotional, mental intelligence to deal with the situation, or if you are going to be dragged by an external situation, regardless of the situation it may be, that makes you a fragile human being and apparently unprotected. Now, we have a search or an attempt to understand life. Each one of us wonders, what is life for myself? What am I doing here? What am I as a human being? What is the human being of today? What is happening? What happens to the planet? Does it have to do anything with myself or not? And there is something that has to that we have to reflect about is the victimism. I always reflect very much about this because we have the tendency of being exempt of responsibility of what happens on the planet. There is always someone responsible for what happens, and we are always exempt and placing ourselves in a position of a victim. And we could say, oh, I don't feel I am a victim. I don't have a victimism as a behavior. But observe yourselves a little bit better. Do we have the tendency of complaining, for example? Do we complain about something outside of us? Or when something happens and it's not the same as our aspiration of life or our values, do I try to consolidate this value, express it and build, or is my first attitude to complain? If my first attitude is to complain, I do have an attitude of a victim. I believe that someone is responsible for something. I don't feel I am consistent with my actions. I believe that this is a responsibility of others. Others on many levels, from the closest relationships to professional relationship or even wider ones. For example, the pollution of the seas. No, it's with the ships, with those who throw bottles in the sea. But don't we use plastic in our lives? Don't we use something that's going to end up somewhere? Plastic that's going to end up somewhere? Don't we feel responsible for this? So the general collective thought generates in us this position of a victim to create this process of complaint that is useless. What is the use of complaining? We need to realize how I can make the best use of the countless opportunities of the day by day to express my best. Or am I going to always depend on someone to do something for me to also do? So see, this lecture is addressed to all those of us who have made the decision or want to make the decision of participating in life in a more conscious and constructive way, and not depending so much on that which happens outside of us as if we didn't have any possibility of collaborating with that which we believe that is correct, evolutive, constructive, whichever way each one can understand. So do we make good use of each moment of our lives to keep this inner environment of ours healthy? For example, in the relationships, in professional life, in social life, do allow myself to embrace and absorb everything that is negative or less constructive, as if it were not going to affect me? Or do I filter this with discernment, and really at a certain point I establish something? No, I'm not going to establish a limit. No, I'm not going to allow myself to experience this type of feeling. I'm not obliged to do this. I need to keep my inner health, my mental, emotional health, so that I can be proactive in the world and carry a positive code. Otherwise, again, this whole negative influence remains in our subconscious, quiet, and someday at a certain point, in a moment of fragility, it's going to be activated from within me, and I'm going to have a negative reaction or a negative feeling towards others or towards my neighbor, and I don't know where it comes from. It only hurts ourselves, wounds ourselves. Have you ever felt wounded by your own reaction? For example, we have a reaction against someone or a situation. It doesn't have great repercussions, but we feel uncomfortable inside. We deeply know that reaction only wounded us. This is the only thing that it made. So what wounds us oftentimes is perhaps our excessive flexibility to allow ourselves to express uncontrolled feelings, disorganized ideas, and this hurts our deep consciousness, and this is why we feel this uncomfort. So these reflections are important if we want to give attention to all of this, and we want to give an inner healthy constructive life and collaborate with the world and not only be one more nourishing this whole dissociation? Do we have the courage internally and externally to manifest our best regardless of the conditions? Or do we end up commonly in the world selling ourselves to manifest a pattern only to be accepted by that which is collective? Does it bring peace to us to adhere to a pattern that we believe that it doesn't belong to our values? Does it bring peace to us just to feel included? Is this really an illusion to go against that which is the best within us? No. For us to have strength to sustain these values and eventually not go against external life. It's not about that. We are speaking about inner life values, and therefore something that is very internal, intimate, and oftentimes very anonymous. We could be inside of collective transportation and going through any situation and be radiating and expressing our best. Even if we don't say a word, even if we don't share ideas and feelings, we are just there radiating. We are a human being that is developing their inner life. This has an influence, so much so that if something happens outside here or in the transportation later, have you ever felt when we go through an environment and we feel that the place is heavy, we say, oh, this is dense, heavy. Any of us, have we ever experienced or any of us has experienced this or has been experiencing this daily? We feel that the environments radiate something and create some condition. So what do we want to radiate to the world? Do we want to be a matrix of welfare, of constructive values, or do we want to be a replica of less positive situations? We have to ask ourselves, because from this decision and choice will come our destiny, that which we will build and we will find outside of us. Well, finally, we are going to reflect about something that happens very much in the world of today that we don't give much attention to, which is that which we call, begins with respect and ends up in that which we call reverence. And we think that reverence is like a figure outside of us that we have to have for some reason, some type of respect or reverence. But it's something that goes much beyond this. If we identify within us a higher value in the field of harmony, of beauty, devotion for something that is higher, doesn't matter. If we feel that something for us is wider than our consciousness and activates within us a pattern of reverence, the world of today goes against the way of reverence, isn't it? We become irreverent with one another. We give ourselves the permission to go beyond familiarity, and we eventually don't respect that which exists within someone else in their depths that is a value. And with this, I run over others in my interpretation of that which they are. I become irreverent, and at a certain point, our relationships lower their level, and in this movement we no longer manage to consider that within each one of you present here, for example, there is something higher, some higher value, a deep being. There is a deep nature that needs to express itself. In relationships, this is very necessary, otherwise we lower the quality of this, and at a certain point we don't even manage to identify the best within us or the best within someone else, and which quality of relationship are we building then? Is this the world where we want to live, or do we want to be a constructive, evolutive agent before this, from this movement of a reencounter with my inner life, of being with myself, and from there I manage to have a healthy distance with others, especially respecting and having reverence to that which exists within others, even if others don't have conscious of this, awareness of this, because each one of us has this light within. Have we ever thought of this, or do we judge others by their appearance? Well, we'll stop these impulses and reflections here so that we can ask questions if you have any. And I leave here this invitation. Which type of human being do we want to be in this chaotic, dissociative, confusing world? Do we need an inner life, or do we think that it's fine? Do we want to rescue this vision that goes a little bit beyond appearances and value that which and who is before us? Because otherwise life goes by, hours pass, years pass, and at a certain point we ask ourselves, but what am I doing here at last? With those who we live together, do we know each other profoundly? Do we know this being that is within the other, this value that is hidden inside someone else? Otherwise, how are we going to treat young people, children? Which world are we leaving to the coming generations? A world of superficiality, a world of dissociation, or it doesn't matter the degree, a little bit more constructive world, as I have been able to manifest that which is the best within me in some degree. But this is possible if I cultivate inner life and if I feel a deep need of re-encountering myself. And from there, right away, I also begin to respect others. So respect for others is not only born in the process of education. It is born from an inner re-education, and knowing if I want to be respected in my values, I also need to respect others. Or am I so limited in my vision that I think that only I have values and others don't? We have to reflect about all of this again if we want to be a constructive, evolutive human being with a healthy inner life, and to be able to collaborate with everything that happens in the world in a more positive way. Does any one of you have a question about these subjects? Friar Luciano.
Nossas atitudes no dia a
The
dia
microphone,
podem nos
because
levar a ter maior contato
of
com a
the
vida
transmission.
interior,
Friar
porque
Luciano,
na vida moderna nós
do
somos
our
demandados muito
attitudes
pro
on the day by
exterior,
day
né? Nós
lead
temos
us
nosso
to have more
trabalho,
contact with
é o trânsito
inner life, because in the
caótico, a vida
external life we
caótica
are
nas cidades,
led to
as
external
demandas
life,
com a
our
família.
jobs, our
Então, isso
chaotic
tudo nos traz para a vida
transit,
exterior.
chaotic life in the
Pouco
city, demands
contato
in
com a
the
vida
family.
interior.
All of this brings
Então, de que
us to
forma nós
our
podemos ter
external
mais
life
contato com a
and
vida
little to the
interior,
inner life.
vivendo
So
nesse
how
mundo
can we be
que
more in contact with inner life,
basicamente no
living
exterior?
in this world that is basically external? Everything begins by our self-observation. We begin to observe ourselves, our consciousness, and how our consciousnesses perceive and interact with all the demands of the day, because to give attention to inner life has nothing to do with isolating yourself from the external life. All the contrary, They are environments and realities that live together, coexist, and they must coexist because they balance each other. So the process begins by observing our own consciousness, observing that which we are thinking, the quality of our thought, the quality of our feelings, the quality of our goals, our intentions. So this could happen while I'm here, while I was sharing my experience of life and this informational knowledge. I was observing my inner consciousness. These are movements that happen on many levels, and they happen at the same time. For example, imagine our being, how it's difficult. So imagine we have the first level, the second level, and we have what is the most noisy. What is the most noisy? The first level. The lobby or the last level. The most noisy is the lobby. So our relationship with our mental body, with our emotional body, and even more profound, our subtle bodies, they are generally very unconscious for us. But we know that they exist, so much so that our consciousness is capable of realizing what happens outside and seeing ourselves in a position of observer. This observer is something within us that is in some of the levels in this building, this analogy, in this example. So what to do? You begin to give more attention to this state of observation. So while I interact with the family, with the transit, with the work, I am here. I need to be there. This is where my learning experience is. So two keys there. This observation, this intention of observing this, the intention of turning yourself to your own consciousness, and what also helps much to ask ourselves each day, at each moment, what do I have to learn with that which is happening outside and inside of myself? Do we ask this? What do I have to learn with this? And oftentimes life places us in a situation in which we have to learn something. I insist. So the fact that apparently disturbs me or challenges me, it doesn't disappear from my consciousness, or it doesn't change the quality, simply because I don't ask myself, what do I have to learn with that? And oftentimes, someone or a situation presents itself to us to stimulate ourselves in the field of tolerance, for example. As I don't do this exercise in the consciousness of observing myself and asking myself what I have to learn with this will continue to happen. If it's not with someone, it's going to be with another person. Because at this moment of life, I need to develop tolerance, either in the work, with the family, in the transit. Everything will show myself about intolerance. As I don't do a movement in my consciousness to ask, what does it want to teach me about? What do I have to learn with this? This continues to happen. And I end up having a disharmonious reaction before that, simply for being developing or not cultivating this movement of inner life. So again, giving attention to this, observing your own consciousness, and at the same time interacting with life in the best way possible. And you realize that it doesn't dissociate you, all the contrary, it creates gradually a unity with that which happens outside of yourself and what happens inside of yourself. And in this continuous movement of revision, you add values and transmute situations, rather than being a victim of this stimulus that was interpreted as a stimulus for intolerance, irritation, impatience, lack of courage, discouragement. So I can be transformed through this. because I'm transforming my consciousness and asking myself, what do I have to learn with this? See, every time something returns once and again, time and again to our consciousness, there's a lesson there. Why don't we take this opportunity? It's for free. Life is bringing this lesson to us, and we deny it because we are interpreting this as something that goes against the way of how we thought and felt, and we had our expectation. However, life is life. It's totally out of control. I don't know if I have answered.
Boa noite a todos. Boa noite, Frei Luciano. Minha pergunta é o seguinte.
Good evening to all. Good evening, Friar Luciano. My question is, I would like to know,
E tenho
I
essa
work
dificuldade
as a nurse
de quando tem a provocação, eu responder na hora. Eu queria ser uma pessoa mais silenciosa.
and I
Já li o seu livro.
I have the difficulty to answer things right away. I have read your book speaking about silence that has helped me very much. I would like to know what I should do when I am provoked. I always have this doubt. You see, we have, as we were saying, we have the possibility of observing our consciousness, and in the mental plane we have a mental consciousness. If we are in a state of observation of what is happening inside of us, we have the condition to see that something is approaching in the emotional plan, and we have some time to realize that something is approaching, and then the reaction can be positive, but you have to have a margin of action so that any impulse that comes, you have a margin to be able to deal with that and adjust your behavior to not respond in the same tone, let us say. But this margin is built in this movement of giving attention to your inner life and expanding your inner consciousness. So if you aspire, for example, to have higher feelings, positive feelings, including tolerance, flexibility, listening to others, which is very difficult, right? To learn how to listen to something that for you is contradictory or that is against your way of thinking. But if you develop an inner life, this gives you inner space, and when you realize this impulse that is outside of you and you see it mentally coming, it crosses the mental, the emotional, you perceive that reaction. But if you have an inner life, the feelings that you cultivate in your inner life, they meet the situation and this is dissolved and you no longer express that. I oftentimes this goes beyond our control. If we have an inner life, observe yourselves from now on. If we give attention to this and we have inner life, at a certain point, I receive the same stimulus from the same person, perhaps with the same situation, and you think you're going to react in that way, and unexpectedly this passes and you say, oh, where did the reaction go to? It means that our inner life is bearing fruits. You are dedicating yourself to this inner silence, to your values, regardless of what happens outside of you. So when it comes, this energy comes, your own inner life has the enough expansion to perceive the movement, absorb this, transmute it, and it doesn't even touch you, but it's not a proud attitude. Be attentive. It's not for you to say, oh, I'm better than that. I didn't even react to that. It's not a good path, okay? When it goes through you, you simply see that passing through you, and you even have empathy to that, to say, oh, why that before you had such a unnecessary reaction, and in this radiation you render an even greater service, because that thing that came receives back this beneficial reaction as a result of inner life. I don't know if I have answered you.
Boa noite, Frei.
Boa noite.
Em que ponto
Good
a
evening,
gente
Friar.
encontra o equilíbrio entre
At each
essa
point
vida
do we
interior
find
e a
balance
vida exterior na qual a
between
gente
this
está
inner
inserido?
life
E qual a
and external
estratégia
life
pra gente
where
chegar
we are
nesse ponto de
inserted to,
equilíbrio?
and what is the strategy for you to reach this balance point?
Eu vou mudar um pouco sua pergunta para chegar numa
I'm going to
resposta
change your
que eu acho
question
que
a
vai ser
little
interessante
bit.
para todos nós. Sim. Quando você quer andar,
To reach an answer that I
você tem
think
que
will be
desequilibrar,
interesting
não?
to all of us. When
Se eu me levando aqui
you,
começo
when
a
you
andar,
want
tem
to
que
walk
desequilibrar
with balance, you
para
have
viver um
to
equilíbrio
bring
dinâmico.
unbalance.
Então, eu só agregaria a palavra dinâmico na sua
So
pergunta, tá?
I would only
Porque a vida
add
é um movimento
the
dinâmico.
word dynamic in your question,
dinamismo
to your
da vida
question,
externa
because life is a
E o
dynamic
dinamismo da vida
movement.
interna, eles
So the
convivem
dynamism of
continuamente,
external
como
life
dizia na primeira
and the
reflexão.
dynamism of
Isso é
inner life
contínuo, nós não
live
não
to
podemos parar,
coexist
nem
continuously,
interromper,
as I
nem
said.
nossa vida interna,
This is
nem a
continuous.
nossa
We
vida
cannot
externa.
stop or interrupt
ponto é
neither our inner life nor
Qualidade
our external
da
life.
atenção
The point
que eu
is
dou a esse
the
movimento.
quality of the
Então, por exemplo,
attention
eu
that
tenho
I
que ir ao
give to this
shopping,
movement.
buscar alguma coisa.
So, for example,
Muito bem, eu entro
I
no
have to
shopping,
come to the
tem
shopping
todo esse movimento
and get
centrífugo,
something.
não? Esse
So,
movimento
well,
me puxa para
I go to
fora.
the shopping,
Então,
there's
se eu
this
estou
whole
concentrado em buscar
centrifugal
o que eu preciso,
movement, this
eu
movement
ingresso
that is
ali,
pulling me
estou atento ao que
outside.
está se passando na
So,
minha consciência naquele
if
momento,
I
porque
want to
estou
get what I need, I
tentando
enter
viver
there.
esse
I am
exercício de
attentive to what
autoobservação.
is happening in my
Eu vou ali,
consciousness, because
faço
I'm
esse
trying
inicial,
to live
e
this
está equilibrado.
exercise of self-observation.
Agora, se
So
eu
I
vou
go
ali,
to the mall,
nossa, que
I
bom,
do this, that
vou ali
which is
também.
essential,
Está
and
no
everything
segundo,
is
terceiro
balanced.
piso. Então, e
But if I
aí?
go
Vamos
there and say,
segundo,
oh, this is great,
Então,
this is
certa altura,
I'm going to the
essa
third floor, I'm
desproporção
going to the cinema, I'm going to the...
gera algum
At a
desequilíbrio
certain point,
que
this
não permite que a
lack
nossa
of
consciência
proportion
sinta
generates
relativamente
some
paz.
lack of balance that does
Então, eu me
not
sinto ou
allow
muito
our
puxado pra
consciousness to
fora,
feel relatively
ou
in peace.
excessivamente,
So
que
I
também não é
either feel that
saudável,
I'm being too much pulled
interiorizado ao ponto de
outside,
ser
or
quase
excessively, that
esquizofrênico.
which is not
Temos que
healthy,
ter muito cuidado,
interiorized to the point
porque a
of
nossa
being
natureza,
almost
ela é constituída para
schizophrenic.
esse equilíbrio
We have to
perfeito
be
entre o que
very
acontece
careful
dentro
because
de nós
our
e o que
nature is
acontece fora de
built
nós.
to this
Então,
perfect
veja que em
balance
termos
that
de
which
valores,
happens
sim,
outside of us and inside
o que
of
eu
us.
busco dentro de mim,
But in terms of
ele existe
values,
para
let
ser
us see.
expresso na
What I
vida
look
externa.
for inside
Eu
of
estou aqui nesse
myself,
mundo
it
para
exists
interagir,
to be
por um ser
expressed
social,
in
por
external
natureza.
life.
Sim.
If I am here in this world to
Interajo, e
interact,
esse
I am a
equilíbrio, a
social
saúde disso,
being
na medida que eu
by
consigo
nature.
manter a minha
So I
coerência
interact,
e a minha
and this
persistência
balance,
na
the health of
manifestação
this
desses
is,
valores.
happens as I can
Se eu
keep
vou
out my
desanimando,
coherence
desistindo
and
desses valores,
persistence in the
vou
manifestation of these values.
chutando balde,
If
como
I get
diz no
discouraged
popular,
and
não?
give up
E
of
começando a
this
absorver
on
qualquer coisa, e manifestando qualquer
these
padrão,
values
a uma certa altura eu
and
tenho uma
absorb
sensação
anything
que
and
vem de
manifest
forte
any
demais.
pattern,
Mas não
at
é
a
que está
certain
demais,
point I have
é
a
porque você não está
sensation that
encontrando
what is coming
equilíbrio
from outside is
e
too
a
much.
não está
But it's not that
sustentando
it's too
expressar
much, it's
fora de
because you
você
don't
o que está
find
dentro de
balance
você.
and you don't sustain to
E, de
express
novo,
that
se o que
which
está
is
acontecendo fora
outside
de
of you,
nós não é tão
that which is
construtivo, em
inside of
geral
you.
não é. Como nós
Again, if
gostaríamos,
what is happening
é um
outside of
estímulo ainda
us
mais
is
para nós
not constructive,
fortalecermos a nossa
generally it's
resiliência
not.
e,
It
com
is
mais torque
even
ainda,
one more stimulus
colocar
for
para
us
fora o
to
nosso melhor.
strengthen our
E esse equilíbrio é um equilíbrio
resilience and
profundamente
even more
dinâmico.
torque
Não
to
existe uma regra
bring
para
to
isso, essa é a
outside
própria
our
vida.
best. And this balance is
Claro,
profoundly
cada
dynamic.
percebe
There is
muito
no
bem em que momento,
rule
vamos dizer
for
assim, a
this.
pessoa
This
diz
is
assim, "Não,
life.
gostaria de estar no
Of
alto da
course,
montanha."
each one realizes very well.
Acontece aquela situação bizarra. A pessoa
No,
vai para
I
a
would like to
montanha e
be
fica
at the
no seu
top of
lugar.
the mountain. And something happens, you
Então,
go
não é
to the top
exatamente
of
o
the
alto da
mountain
montanha, nem
and is
exatamente essa
working on the
uma
cell
atitude
phone.
nossa.
So it's
podemos
not
estar diante de
precisely
todo
the
esse
top of the
estímulo desse
mountain or the
ambiente aqui
city.
que nos
It's an
rodeia,
attitude of
no shopping, por
ours.
exemplo,
So we
podemos
can
estar no nosso
be
interior,
before
em
all
perfeito
this
equilíbrio. Se eu tenho que estar no
stimulus, a
shopping
mall,
nesse
for
momento,
example, and be
aquilo
in
está
our inner
equilibrado.
world in a
Aí
perfect
vem o
balance.
discernimento.
If I have to be at the mall
Se eu
at this
vou num lugar
moment,
onde
this
eu
is
não deveria
balance,
estar,
balanced.
seguramente vou
Then
sentir
there is
desequilíbrio.
discernment. If I go somewhere where I should not be, I will for sure feel a lack of balance, and my inner world will give me some warning. Come out, because I'm not feeling well. Do you see? It's not a linear answer. It doesn't exist. A three-dimensional answer. So you have to turn to one side, the other, and get the consistency of the answer, which seems to be this dynamic balance in our relationship with that which we find inside and that natural tendency of expressing outside. Because even if I find the value of love, for example, why should you keep love inside of you? You have been created to love life, the planet, humanity. This empathy is natural in us. If I find some degree of inner peace, the first thing that comes from inside is to share, to radiate this peace, because it's natural, it's a dynamic balance. There's no rule. The rule is to be attentive to oneself and perceive these signs that our consciousnesses give to us constantly. If I am here attentive to my inner world, I realize when I have to interrupt the lecture. But there is no ship saying, lighting a light or pressing a button saying, that's it. No. So balance is dynamic. Generally, we are afraid of this. We are afraid of this. We want, in any way, preserve that which we have externally, and we think that we are going to get lost. But the logic of life is the opposite. By giving itself, a flower, for example, by giving itself its color, its aroma, perfume, does it give itself afraid of losing all of this? No, it does it continuously, doing the whole movement, expressing its best. Do we, as human beings, by touching our best, do we keep this for us, or do we offer this to the world? This balance is dynamic, very much dynamic. I don't know if I have answered you. Any other question? Yes.
O agravamento da situação planetária, da transição planetária e das situações
as the planetary transition gets
no planeta como
more
todo,
serious and the external situations get more serious,
equilíbrio,
how can we keep serenity, balance,
da consciência do
agora,
do eterno presente, da não ansiedade,
in the consciousness of the now, the eternal presence of not being anxious,
algo que pode
feeling
se agravar
or
no
perceiving,
planeta ou nos locais onde você está.
Or foreseeing that something that could become more serious on the planet or at the places where you are. You see, we are a creative and constructive unity. Although we may not believe this, each human being has a very great potential. So, regardless of the chaos and the situation, if we have an intention of learning something with all of this and cultivating our inner life to constructively collaborate with all of this, this is what we can do. Anxiety, anguish, worries, all of this comes from a lack of proportion that the consciousness experiences when it knows very well that it's not doing what it should be doing, or it's not. If I am doing my best, if I am cultivating within myself everything that I know that is correct, if I am really trying to learn with situations, taking each opportunity of the day and the life to express my best without missing one opportunity even, I have no reason to be anxious. There is no logic. There is no logic. This comes from our thinking that we have control of our lives. So when something outside of our control externally, in the proportion of your planetary expression, we have the impression that we are losing the control of ourselves. No, it's not like that. The world, humanity have a stimulus.
Se alguém ativar
And
uma
at
guerra nuclear, por
until a
exemplo,
certain point,
eu
I'm
vou
going
ter
to
que
share the
compartilhar o
destiny of
destino
this. If
deles
someone
tomar essa
activates a
decisão.
nuclear war, for
Mas
example, I have
dentro de
to
mim,
share the
mesmo
destiny
humanamente, eu vou
of
experimentar uma
making this
profunda
decision.
paz.
But inside of
Porque
me,
eu sei
and even
conscientemente
humanly, I'm
que eu
going to
estou
experience
fazendo
a
o que eu venho
profound peace
fazendo o
because I
melhor
consciously
possível
know
a cada
that I am
momento,
doing,
sem
I have been doing
desistir das minhas
my
metas
best
e
at
das
each
minhas
moment without giving
aspirações.
up on my goals
Então, de
and
novo, é o
aspirations.
quanto eu sou coerente com o que
So
acontece
again,
dentro de mim e que eu busco manifestar
it is
fora de
how
mim.
coherent I am with that which happens inside of
Então, eu
myself
posso ir
and
aqui no
outside of
litoral,
myself, and
ver
what
ali
happens in the world is just a
plástico no mar, por
circumstance. So
exemplo.
I can be
Claro,
here
impactante. Sabemos que está fora de lugar
at
aquele
the beach
plástico
and
ali.
see plastic
Mas se eu tenho
in the
cuidado
sea. Of
com
course,
todo o
it's
resíduo que eu
impactful. We
gero,
know that
eu não posso
plastic
estar em paz.
is outside of the
Não estar em
place, but if
paz
I
com
am
o plástico
careful
no
with
mar. Estou em
all
paz porque eu tenho uma
the
atitude
rubbish that I
coerente com
generate,
aquela
I can
situação.
be at peace, not at
Não sei se
peace
me
that
explico. Então, aquela
plastic is
incoerência
in the
toda não me
sea.
toca.
No, just
Tem
that
uma
I'm
margem
in
de
peace
manobra
because
ali,
I am
eu estou fazendo o
consistent
melhor
with that
possível.
situation, so that
O ponto
the
aqui, em
whole
geral,
incoherence
nós
doesn't
não
touch me.
estamos fazendo o nosso melhor possível,
The point is
aliás,
that
estamos bem aquém
generally
disso,
we are not
não?
doing our best.
Porque não temos essa pegada,
Actually, we
digamos
are
assim, de
much
aproveitar
behind
cada
our
momento de
best
nossa vida
because we
para
don't
ali
have that
plasmar
touch
o
of
que nós
making good
queremos ser o
use of
melhor.
each moment of our
Ah,
lives
mas
to
é
then
fácil falar, não. Não,
materialize that
temos
which
que
we
viver
believe is
isso.
our best.
Tem nada a ver
But
com que o
it's
outro me
easy to
escutar ou
speak,
não,
right? No,
o
we have
outro
to
me
live
aceitar ou
this.
não.
It has
Isso é uma
nothing to do with
experiência
others
anônima.
listening to me or not, others
Porque eu tenho que ser um
accepting
estudante
me or
medíocre
not. This is
só
an
por meus colegas
intimate
são
and
medíocres.
anonymous situation.
Por quê?
Why do I have to be a
Porque eu tenho que
mediocre
ser um ser humano
mediocre
associativo,
a
se todos são
student if,
associativos?
because my
Por que eu tenho
colleagues
visto
are
isso?
mediocre?
Onde está escrito isso?
Why do I have a
Porque eu tenho que ser
dissociative human
agressivo,
being if
porque
all
todos são
are
agressivos?
dissociative?
Onde está
Where is
escrito
it
isso?
written? Why
Onde está esse
do I
código de
have to be
conduta?
aggressive? Oh, because
Código
all
de
are
conduta
aggressive.
eu
Where
estabeleço
is
para
this
mim
written?
mesmo.
Where
Eu
is
sou
this
livre.
code of behavior?
Todos somos
The
livres.
code of behavior
Não
I
existe isso.
established for myself.
Sim, é
I am
impactante.
free. We are all free.
Sim.
It doesn't exist.
Não é muito
Yes, it's impactful. Yes,
luminoso, talvez horizonte da humanidade, não. Porém, eu vou colocar minha atenção no
the
potencial
horizon of humanity
desse
is not
exato
very
momento,
luminous,
no que eu posso colaborar para
but
ampliar
I'm
esse
going to
horizonte.
put my attention
Ou eu
on the
vou olhar-
potential at this moment,
dar uma
on
analogia,
how I
sim?
can collaborate to expand this
Coloco aqui
horizon.
madeira,
I'm going to give you an
começa a queimar.
analogy.
nós
I
temos
have
aqui,
here a
então,
piece of
três
wood
situações.
and I begin to
A
burn
cinza,
it.
a madeira
We then have
queimando,
three
chama.
situations, the ashes,
em geral,
the wood burning and
naturalmente,
the
nossa
flame.
consciência é atraída para olhar para onde?
Generally, naturally, our consciousness, where is our consciousness
que é possível.
attracted to look at?
A cinza,
At the flame,
está
which
aí
is
se
life,
dissociando,
which is what is
é cinza.
possible.
Ela
The
vai virar
ashes,
composto,
everything
vai
that
ser
is there,
reciclada em alguma
dissociating are the ashes.
madeira, a fibra
They are going
diária,
to be
é o
composed,
substrato
going
onde
to
aquilo
be
está acontecendo.
recycled in some way.
Mas
The
a
wood,
vida,
daily life
a
is the
luz que a
substract
chama- que a
where
chama
all of
gera,
this is
é
happening.
para onde a nossa
But
consciência
life,
interna
the
naturalmente
light that the
atraída.
flame generates
uma
is
uma
where
criança
our
for olhar
inner
para uma fogueira,
consciousness is attracted to.
Óbvio que ela vai olhar para a chama um tempo e vai ficar ali magicamente
You
super interessada
ask
naquele
for a
movimento
child
criativo da
to look
chama.
for the fire,
aquele
of
brilho,
course they are going
em
to
todo
look at the
aquele calor,
flame,
em toda
very
aquela
interested in the
possibilidade
active
de
movement
vida.
of the flame, the
Então, cabe
brilliance,
a nós
the
decidirmos no
heat,
dia a dia,
the
vou
whole
olhar para a
possibility of
madeira que
life.
queima,
So
pra
it's
cinza
up to us
ou
to
pra chama que
decide
está no
each
meu
day, am I
interior,
going to
está
look
no
at the
potencial dentro de
wood
cada
burning,
situação.
the ashes, or the
Mesmo
flame that
aparentemente
is within
negativa.
me is in the potential of
Basta
each
criar um
situation,
mecanismo de
even
perguntar,
those that are
"O que eu
apparently
tenho que aprender com
negative.
isso?
It's enough
eu
to
posso aprender com
generate the
isso?
mechanism of
Ou que
asking myself, what do I
pese
have
essa
to learn with
aparência, eu
this? What
posso
can I
expressar
learn
aquilo
with this?
positivo?"
Or
Andaremos por aí
how can
muito
I
mais pacíficos,
express of positive
muito mais
despite of the
felizes,
appearance?
nos sentindo
We will
muito
be
mais
much
plenos
more
do que nos
peaceful
envolvendo com
around,
tanta
much
negatividade.
much happier, feeling ourselves much
Mais alguma
filled
pergunta?
than when we get involved with situations of negativity. Any other question?
Bom,
Well, this
esse ciclo
cycle of
palestra está sendo
lectures
transmitido
is
ao
being
vivo.
transmitted
Então,
live. We
centenas de
have
pessoas
hundreds of people accompanying us
Amanhã eu estarei em
now.
Salvador
Tomorrow we will be
com o
in
tema
Salvador
sobre a
with
nossa
the theme,
capacidade de escutar.
our capacity of listening. Then
Depois
we are going
estaremos
to
no
be in Rio
Rio
Grande do Sul, Florianópolis, Curitiba, Brasília.
Em
In January,
Friburgo,
Friburgo, Teresópolis,
Santo,
Espírito Santo, then I will
Depois volto
return
para
to Portugal. But
Mas
all of
tudo
this
será
will be
transmitido ao
transmitted
vivo, quem
live.
quiser
Those who want
acompanhar,
to accompany,
temos uma
we
fileira
have
nas cadeiras,
flyer
podem
on the
preencher com
chairs.
seus
You can
e-mails,
fill it
contatos,
with your emails,
manteremos contato.
contacts.
As
The
transmissões
transmissions
são
are
abertas, depois estarão já
open.
automaticamente no canal da Irdin Editora. Pelo chat também pode
You
fazer
can also
perguntas,
ask
se tiverem
questions through
alguma.
the chat if you have
Como eu
any.
sempre digo,
And as
vida que
I
segue,
always
não?
say,
Vamos colaborar
life
de alguma
continues.
maneira para
Let
que
us
esse mundo seja um pouco
collaborate in
melhor.
some way for this
Que as
world to
gerações
be
que
a
estão
little
vindo aí
better,
também
and
encontrem a
so
nossa
that the
parcela de
generations that are
colaboração,
coming
um
may
dia possamos
also find our
botar a
parcel
cabeça
of
no travesseiro de paz
collaboration,
e saber que fizemos o melhor
and
que
to
esse
know
mundo fosse
that we
pouco
have
mais
done the
equilibrado.
best, our best for this world to
Boa
be
noite,
a little
obrigado
bit
por estarem
more
aqui.
balanced. Good evening, good night, and thank you for being here.